measure the engine supposed to meet. So you monitor these parameters for these.
It starts recording, so we're recording.
At that time.
Okay.
We got cameras,
We're
all
rolling.
the cameras.
I'm
Right?
going to sit down here.
Well, while you've got me on camera, I'm going to say thanks to you, Wayne, for all you did in this program this evening, okay?
Okay.
And it was great to see you again. And I hope we'd see you again before too long.
Oh, I hope so
Not
too.
just another one of these things.
Right.
So if you're coming out to the East Coast, stop by and see us.
I was in Cherry Point in the early 90s,
Come
working
by.
on the OB-10s.
They got a big
For Garrett.
They got a big air show coming up in the fall. So
Yeah.
come on out.
You live in North Carolina, don't you?
Just moved back. Yeah, we were originally basically from Raleigh, which is the capital city in the middle of the state. And I've been in South Carolina for the past 14 years, near Greenville, just south of Charlotte. And we decided we'd move as a final resting place, if you will, to New Bern. And the reason we went there is because we sailed in and out of New Bern a lot. Had a boat and a boat club there. And so I sold or gave my half of the boat to my son. He bought the other half of the boat from my partner and closest friend. And so he's coming down to the boat club all the time in New Bern. So I told my wife, I said, if we really want to see them, we probably better move to New Bern so that they'll come down. They'll come down and visit, yeah. So we bought a house in New Bern, moved to New Bern.
It doesn't sound like that's near Tryon.
No, Tryon is in the western part of the state, and I'm quite familiar with Tryon because we went to a church up there in Tryon. And we went to Lutheran church there in Tryon.
Her sister lives in Tryon.
Oh, is that right? That's a nice little town up there. There's not much there, but it's it's in the mountains, but I like the mountains. I love the mountains.
Well, the business he's in, he runs out of the house.
So he can be anywhere.
So he's
Is there
he's
a
in a beautiful
focus?
place.
Is there a focus? Is that it?
That's just people up
Near the
there.
river,
Not
and
that good. I'll let you play with it.
not in town.
I think it's autofocus.
He's in the business of real estate agent. Sure, Eddie,
You might have focused. Well, here's the line and telephone.
got the office
Yeah,
right there.
it's a nice
Got a little
location.
separate building
Watch the.
where he does it all.
You got Asheville,
Okay, that's
just up the road, you know.
But I think
Or if
it's
you want to go down to
autofocus.
Greenville, you can go there.
I'm not sure.
Or if you want to travel a little bit
Sometimes
further,
you-
you can go to
yeah.
Charlotte. We got together and what my thoughts were about this gathering tonight, and then go around the tables and have each one introduce themselves, because some of us know somebody over here and maybe somebody over there, and then those two know here, you know. So we'll try to learn to know each other completely tonight before we get out of here. So we'll go ahead and get started a little bit, and I will start by saying that this is for my benefit. All right, I wanted to get together with the guys again that I'd worked with 50 years ago. And they'd had a number of these reunions, you know, they had gone on where the uppity-ups had their get-togethers, you know, and the people that were flying the airplanes and et cetera, but nobody ever really got together for the engine guys. And so I contacted the fellows that I worked with, and I said, hey, when I heard about the Gathering of Eagles event and the fact that they were having an open house, I said, why don't we try to pull the engine guys together at the same time, be an incentive for them to come, so that they could see both the Gathering of Eagles event as well as the open house, and then we could have a get-together and see one another again. And so the people that I contacted, Don and Jerry and Roger, they all pretty much agreed, and also Ruben at the time said that, or subsequent, I guess it was, we talked to Ruben, said, yeah, it'd be a good idea to get together. So that's basically what pulled us together, was just an opportunity for us old engine guys to get together and have one more gathering, if you will. So we have here represented tonight all the engineers, project engineers, if you will, for the X15 engines during the entire program, with the exception of Bob Nagel, who was deceased in 1967. But we do have here Bob's widow and his daughter, and I'll let them introduce themselves as they go around. So basically, we have the entire project engineering team for the X15 group here tonight. Don T. Garden followed Bob Nagel, and then Roger followed Teagarden after he left, and Jerry picked up in 62. To give you some perspective, I'll let these guys tell all the details, but Jerry Brandt picked up in 62 and ran the program from 1962 until the end of the X15 program in 1968. So Jerry was the longest duration guy on the engines, but the rest of the other three were involved in getting it started and dealing with all the initial problems with the XLR 99, and the XLR 11 was pretty straightforward. That thing had been used quite a bit already. So anyway, that's the perspective of this gathering tonight, and I appreciate you all coming, and I appreciate your response. So what I'd like to do, and if you want a modified approach, let me know. But I'm just thinking that maybe we'll start out with this table over here and go counterclockwise. Well, I guess that could be clockwise from this position, and just start out at the table. Just Don, we'll start with you, and then go clockwise around the table, and. Norm will start out with you, that table. Cleve, we'll start out with you at this table. And Jerry will start out with you at this table. And then just go around the table and introduce yourselves. So starting at table one, what I'd like to do is introduce yourself, tell where you were in the program, time frame that you were there, and something briefly about what you did in the meantime. And then what we're going to do is go back around again. I'm using this as a prompter. Okay, so if anybody's brought DVDs, or anything you'd like to talk about, pick it. We've got time until 11 o'clock tonight. It'll kick us out at 11 if you don't go to sleep on the tables before then. But anyway, so the evening is ours from here on out, just to enjoy each other's company and to reminisce a bit. So I'm going to stop at this point and shut up and ask Don to start with his perspective and introduction.
That was quite a guy to follow, because Bob started out with actually designing the test facility in another organization. He came to power plant branch and became the first project engineer that we had. And then he decided to go on to some other programs. And I got to try to fill his shoes. And filling his shoes was like being dropped into a tank of sharks. Because on one side I had Bill Arnold. On the other side I had a guy by the name of Bob Field, who was a North American guy. And Wayne Oninger over at NASA, John McTeague over there. And I was a gas turbine engineer. And the one thing I knew about a rocket engine was that it was sort of a little cannon-looking thing that had a fuse hanging out of the bottom of it. We lit it with a match, and fire started coming out the back end half the time, starting and running. But anyway, I want to tell you just a few short stories about how I coped with this problem. Bob left me with some instructions on what to do about things in general. The primary one that he left was that he said that the PSTS has dumped water all over the propulsion system on me twice, automatically. He says, you better fix that, or you're not going to last very long. So the first thing I did there was to go over and look at it, use my experience with gas turbine engines. We shut off the automatic sensing system and put in the switch. And we watched for the fire. And the next thing that happened was I had to get, can you guys hear me?
Yeah. I hear you real well.
I'm going to hear some more. I'll tell you a story about Bill Arnold. First of all, first thing I saw when I came in here was Bill, and he looked at me and he says, I thought you were dead. I think he actually knew I was coming because he brought his army with him. But the next thing I had to do was acquire all of the responsibility. And that time at the Air Force, you had to sign for all the pieces of equipment that you were responsible for. We had stuff called ground support equipment. And I found everything except one sort of stand of some sort. I didn't know what it looked like. But anyway, I started putting pressure on Bill. And I kept putting pressure on him, and he kept giving me excuses that they couldn't find it anywhere. Finally, one day, he comes running up the stairs in the power plant branch, waving a piece of paper at me, which was a telegram. And he was huffing and puffing. I thought it was just another excuse. And I looked at it, and I just burst out laughing. The telegram said, call off the dogs, we found it. So from then on, he and I got to be good friends. And the next next story has to do with Bob Field. Bob was a pretty crusty old guy. Guys that knew Bob probably appreciate what I have to say about that. But anyway, we got acquainted and worked together, and in our relationship, I finally decided I needed to do something to deal with Bob. So I gave him a book one day that my father had given me. It was How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. Came back to the office one day, threw the book on the table, and says, "I'll be damned if I'll tell the postman he's got a good-looking head of hair." So I busted up with that. And then we went on to have a good time. I was there working on the engine, I guess, for about 6 months, and was there when Crossfield flew his last flight, and then Bob White started flying his with the XR-99. It was a terrific experience, one which I've never forgotten. Treasure is a real adventure, even though we did have some funny times.
I was responsible for the instrumentation and all the electrical and everything on the test stand, and also on the engine modifications, whatever. And I was there from before the LR-99 engine arrived in '59, and I was there for all 199 flights. And after that, I stayed for the lifting bodies, the -11 stuff, and the 121 engine stuff. And it was really a great experience, I'll tell you. It's one that's hard to put into words. But that's about all I have to say about it.
All right, thanks. We'll
Yeah.
switch over to Kirsten Nagel now.
I'm Kirsten Nagel. Robert Nagel's daughter. And I really don't know what to say here other than it's been a pleasure to come to the banquet last night and to meet all of you that worked with my father. And Rudy wanted me to mention that I brought the poster over here from NASA, and if any of you want a copy, there's some posters over there that you can take home with you if you'd like. Anyways,
Thanks.
I'm not as good a storyteller as Don is, so I'm going to bypass most of that. But I got the tiller from Don after he went to work on the Apollo program, and that's not like such a good deal. After a few months, I followed him over there, so had a relatively short stint as project engineer on the X15 LR-99 engine. But it was a great experience, and it's how I got into rocketry, and I spent some time after that being involved with rocketry on the Apollo, and it was kind of a lead-in to the rest of my career. I know one time that was an interesting experience in the blockhouse, and we had an engine run. Ray Wood had been complaining that he didn't have any configuration control on the instrumentation on the test stand. Every time you had a problem, the only way you could figure out where a wire went was go out there with a meter and try to find where this end of the wire went, where the other end of the wire was. And so we went through that for a long time, and it was very inefficient to try to run the test stand that way. Well, we had this firing and shut the engine down, and we got a little fire out there around the peroxide tank. And so, standard procedure, you send some guys out there with fire extinguishers, and they go out and they squirt the fire extinguishers on the tank, and nothing happens. The fire just gets a little bigger. So they squirt some more, and the fire's getting bigger again. I said, Ray, I think maybe what we ought to do is hit the deluge system and put that fire out, because that fire is only going to get bigger and somebody might get injured. It's in a dangerous area around that peroxide tank. Oh, gee, I don't want to do that. We'll lose the test stand, and we'll be down for a couple of months trying to get it put back together. I said, yeah, but you can straighten out the instrumentation wiring while you're doing that, and you'll know that. So we hit the deluge system, and that's the way it went. But it was a great experience, a great bunch of guys, and it was a fun part of my career.
It's my turn.
Yeah.
I'm Inga Nagel, and of course I was married to Robert Nagel, and we only had 3 good years together, but we really packed it in during those 3 years, hiking in the Sierra Nevada, hiked through the Grand Canyon, and let's see, Lake Powell in 1964 before it was filled. And I remember going up the last 2 miles of Butch Canyon, complaining that it was too hot, and he said, now woman, one of these days you're going to stand underneath here and you cry silent tears when all of this is underwater. In about 94 I was up there, and the ranger said, see that little brown box? That's where the people, their names are in there that have hiked up Butch Canyon. And I turned away and I cried my silent tears, and I looked up on the arch, could almost see him sitting there. And so and I thought to myself, and a friend of mine said, why are you so gloomy? And I said, well, okay, let's see, there's a reason for that. Anyway, we packed it in, and let's see, I wish it could have lasted a lifetime, but it didn't. So I put in 30 years at Palmer High as a high school teacher and a few other good things. And now I do archaeological work as a volunteer, and I'm having a good time. Even so, it's very hard to climb into some caves and so forth, but I manage it. So anyway, that's my story.
Involved with the X15 program. The day I got into service at Edwards was in October of 1956. 20 new lieutenants came in the same day, including Don and Johnny Armstrong, and there were a couple of Covington, not brothers, but there were 2 Lieutenants Covington. But it was about 20 of us came in the same day, and I think, I don't know if Nagel came in, if he came in the same day, but we were all up in the BOQ up there. But anyhow, so we were all in the BOQ essentially, and Bob Nagel, he liked to go hiking, he liked to go skiing, and he played football in I think University of Rochester, yes, or something like that. So he was a real outdoors guy, and always going to the gym. And we lived up in the BOQ, which is by the Officers Club. He would run down to the gym, run back again. But he was a real active person. So we used to go skiing quite a bit to Mammoth, and like Inga said, hiking in the Sierras. And then through the skiing, he met some lady friends, and that's how he met Inga then. And he even took Inga hiking, and some of those trips were pretty good trips in the Sierras. But he was a fun guy. He always, and he had that 53 Buick, big Buick, so it could really cruise. And I think when he visited Inga, it was down in Long Beach, so he really had to travel from Edwards. But then Hicks, he came along a little bit later on. He liked to go hiking and skiing. So
yeah, my first weekend, I came in and checked onto the base on Monday, and the next Saturday, I didn't have any hiking shoes. All I had was tennis shoes. So I was standing on Palisade Glacier with Bob Nagel and Roy Peberman on Saturday, and I'd never been on a mountain before.
Yeah, he was from Iowa. But yeah, when we went up to the glacier, Palisades Glacier, there was a glacier up there. But last time I was up there, there's nothing up there. So, but that's my association with all these people. Thank you.
X15 until I think about 63. I learned the lifting bodies and got to be reassociated with the OLR-11 engines because we had them on the X24 airplane. And then I went on to the Ford swept wing airplane and retired. That was my last project in 1986.
Bill Arnold, and as I think my
brothers have said a couple times already, it paid my way through college, so I appreciate that. And by the way, I was a legacy for a bit at Thiokol down in Irvine, at Thiokol Chemical, where they made photoresist, and I was a facilities engineer there. And Jim Carnes was our vice president. I don't know if anybody knows who Jim Carnes was, but I'd always ask him, and this was in 80, I can't remember, some 70, 78, 79. And I said, Jim Carnes, I said, my dad worked on the X15. He said, what was it, the LR99 engine? He says, that thing was a workhorse. And so he knew about it as well. So it's very good to be here. It's nice meeting all of you.
Well, I'm youngest Arnold, and I think most of you remember me. I think this is about you guys, and I'm just going to sit down and enjoy the conversations you guys got. It's nice seeing a lot of old faces, too. Now that I look as old as I look, now you guys can remember how old you guys are.
I'm Bill Arnold. I was the Reaction Motors Incorporated and Division representative on the LR11 engine, the LR99 engines. And my specific task was to, when they shipped me to the field, is to prevent any government contractor from screwing up any of our engines. And that was a task and a half, to say the least. But anyway, no, I arrived at, my first tour at Edwards was at 1956 on the D558. And we had an engine in that aircraft which was very similar to the LR11 engine, except that it was a XLR8 RM6 engine. And I think, John, were you I forget who was the project engineer on that D558?
Bill, I think.
Okay, well, yeah, Jack McKay was flying it. And then I went back east. But then I came back out with the 99 engine. And I knew it was going to be an easy job because I saw that I had a real good bunch of people to work with. But I learned very shortly is that most of you people were conspiring to make my life miserable. Is that a field person, field engineer, really is in a bad spot. Is that I try to satisfy the customer, but when the customer's not satisfied and the hardware is not working right, I go back to the company and I tell them this thing broke. They say, you're wrong. Those guys did it again. Most of you designers know is that no one criticizes your design. Is that there's no way that it can work. But anyway, I had a lot of fun working with the Air Force engineering group were the primary support. They were keeping all of the shop people working to a point where they develop all the information would feed to NASA. And tell you a good one, and I still, the engineering group would do a, what we call a pressure budget for each particular engine. And it was it tells NASA, all the flight planners, what this engine is going to do. And I pick up a pressure budget from the engineering office one day, and I start reading it. And I say, what the hell is this? And actually what a pressure budget is just tells you all the engine performance, but the parameters in there, instead of being in engineering units, was like Perkins per fortnight and a few other geographic terms that were unmentionable as far as describing what the engine was doing. And unfortunately, I didn't keep a copy of it, and I'm still trying to get a copy of it from it. But anyway, no, I was there through the entire program, through the X15 LR99 engine, through the lifting body program, on up to X24B. And I left Edwards in 1976 with Jerry Brown. Oh! Yeah, Jerry Brandt and I were working on the X24C propulsion system, and that went on for a little while. But the thing I wanted to point out is Jerry had retired. I went to a retirement dinner for him, and I was listening to all of these things. Cleve was there, and they were telling what a wonderful job Jerry was doing, you know, and all the rest of that. And here was a civil service engineer, and I really wanted to say is that the only reason he's as good as he is that he was a contractor first. But anyway, it was a wonderful experience and a tremendous what?
You got to ask for that show of hands on the Tijuana tour that you led.
I know nothing about that. Has anyone been to Tijuana?
No.
Rudy, you were there?
Yeah, I was with the group.
What group? No. Rudy, you know, Rudy showed up. Okay, this goes on. Rudy showed up there at Three Striper, and these fellas here, you know, feeding this kid all this stuff, and he's doing it whatever. Then all of a sudden, NASA's really raising hell about some coating on an engine or something like that. And Rudy gets stuck with this job. But anyway, we went on a tour of a couple of companies, 3 companies that day, trying to develop some sort of a system. And we wound up going to Tijuana. I bought a few deals. I still a holster and whatever. But we did manage to get to a couple bars that night. Wayne was really impressed. And Rudy saved us. But anyway, this could go on forever. Oh boy. Thank you. It was my pleasure. And you know, I have never, and I've worked with a few other government outfits, never worked with a better group than we had here at Edwards, both the Air Force and NASA. And I thank you all.
I want to ask you if you remember getting cursed out over the UHF link by me because I accused you of lying about the delivery time on gold-plated pressure switches. I was talking to the vendor and it contradicted with what you and the Air Force was telling us at NASA.
I really did not lie.
Well, I can remember being chewed out by Perry Rao, my boss, for cursing over the UHF link.
Well, I'm the middle Arnold boy. My name is Tim Arnold. And I think Mr. McKee hit it right on the money last night was when he was talking about family. For me, my memories come from knowing you all, but knowing you all through my kid or your kids. So it's been nice to rekindle all these discussions and find out where all my friends are, from the Boy Scout troop, looking for Mike Adams's airplane when the troop went out, and we went out and went on searches and those kind of things when the plane went down. But to tell a story here about that, I've worked as a field representative all my life also. And I think a field representative, no matter what he says, we try to let everybody, we try to stay as busy as we can, but do as little as we can, and make sure the home office knows that we are busier than anything. He's the only one that knew what I was doing on a day-to-day basis, so he had mastered it a long time before I did.
Oh, we knew that.
So I learned from the master, and I'm still a field representative. I'll never work in-house ever again due to what he's done.
Well, I'm a in-law, daughter-in-law, Tim's wife, and I've been married for 31 years, and the whole thing is always the X15, the X15, the X15, what they did here, what they did. And I have to say that anytime Bill talks about it, he talks about it with a big heart, and I know how much he enjoyed it, and he talks about some of you guys and how some of your stories and how you did this and that, and I truly believe that he enjoyed his whole time with all of you. And I think that it's really wonderful, Rudy, that you got everybody together, and we were able to meet you guys, and I think he's enjoyed it. So thank you very much.
You're back here too. My name's John McTighe, and I had the number 3 airplane given to me after the ammonia tank exploded. I keep hearing that the engine exploded, and it sure as hell didn't, and I try to correct that every chance I get. But I've worked with Billy and with all the Air Force people on 99 engine, and then decided I became project manager for the lift and bodies, and I needed an engine. So what did I do? I went down to the museum in San Diego and got the pack of 2 engines that they had used for the X15. I went to the Air Force Museum and got 2 packs of 2 engines each, so I had now 6 engines. I took my crew over to the college over there and pulled an engine out of the D5A Phase 2 over there, and all the instrumentation and all the controllers and everything that we could get, and brought them back to NASA. Then we went out to the X1E in front of the building and took an engine out of there, plus all the valves and all the stuff, so that we'd have it for the lift and bodies. And then I took them home. I took them to the rocket shop, and which Dave Stoddard was in there, and Billy and his crew was there at our shop, and we disassembled those engines. Or they disassembled them. I didn't do a damn thing. And they put them, got parts from reaction motors, assembled them, and got them in working shape, and then gave them to the Air Force to maintain for the lift and bodies. It cost me $50,000. But I had tried to look for an engine, and the only engine I could find was the Gina engine at Bell Company back in Buffalo. They wanted $20 million for an engine. Well, I only had $2 million to build 2 airplanes, 2 supersonic rocket-powered airplanes, and I had $2 million, and I sure as hell couldn't afford a $20 million engine. So we worked out, and those engines lasted for the whole life of the lift and body program. The X-24A, the X-24B, the X, not the X, but the M2F2, the M2F3, and the HL10. So there's a lot of airplanes we used with those engines that wouldn't have been there if we didn't have the people who knew what they were doing to get the job done. Along those lines, I'll go back and talk about the Phase 2. It was 1953, I believe. The X3 had just arrived at our hangar at the South Base, and Ralph Sparks was the crew chief for it, and I was the loads engineer doing calibrations on it, and he and I were moving jacks around under it. And it was like 6:30 or 7 o'clock at night. They didn't give us overtime, but that was okay. We liked doing what we were doing. And across the hall, across the hangar, was the D5A Phase 2 that Carl was going to fly the next day. And so Carl's over there looking through the cockpit, and I look over, and there's this guy with a whole bunch of gold going up and down his arm. An admiral was over there talking to Carl. Well, Ralph Sparks, if you knew him, he told so many stories that he had to be at least 200 years old, you know, one after another. But the general, or the admiral looks over at us, and I said, oh, he's coming over here. I don't know what the hell I'm going to do. And he got about halfway across the hangar floor, and he looks over, and he says, Sparky, I haven't seen you since we were flying tri-motors in Canada. I believe every word Sparky told me after that. so that's a little bit of my history.
For those of you that were not at the gathering of Eagles,
one of the things I remember about the X15 was when the program was pretty intense, and John was getting calls at all hours of the night with some problem that was going on. We had a new baby at the time, and it was kind of like, well, is the baby going to cry and get me up, or is he going to get a call about the X15? It was his baby at the time.
Okay, I guess, please.
After I got out of the service, I joined North American in 1956. And North American had just won the contract at the end of the previous year for the X15. And I was put into the functional department of North American that did the design and analysis and drafting, laid out all the tanks and the lines and all the equipment, components and tubing and whatnot to build the aircraft. Charlie Phelps at that time was the project manager in charge of the overall system. He had about 70, 80 people working for him. And they did the scheduling and the management and overseeing. But I was in the department that did the legwork. And I stayed on that program until '68 when I left North American. And during the intervening years, I also designed the fuel system on the B-70, and I worked on the B-1 aircraft also. But I want to tell you a little story about something that you may not have known, because I did a lot of interfacing with NASA. When after ship 3 exploded, I was called to come up to Edwards, and I spent a lot of time with Bill Albrecht and other people in NASA, as well as the people down the test stand. And this is, I think, the first time that NASA ever took an interest right off and wanted to know whether or not the drop tanks would actually deploy from the aircraft, prior to taking the aircraft aloft and then punching the tanks off. So Bill wanted to see if they'd work. So he had the Air Force go out and dig a hole in the ground over at the edge of the lake bed. It's about the size of this room, this hole. And they lined this thing with foam rubber, all different sizes. And it was sitting there. And he had the airplane towed over with the drop tanks on it. And he had wired the eject switch so that it only dropped one tank at a time. And the Air Force is going to lift this thing up by its attachment hook on top of the aircraft, suspend it over top of the foam, and then blow the tanks off. That sounded pretty simple. And the guy came up with the forklift. The forklift was about twice the size of this room. Huge thing. I didn't know they'd make them that much. And the two forks that came out from the top of that thing were about 20, 25 feet long. Great, big, long things. And it was also awfully old. And the end of the tines were bent down. And not only that, where they attached on, the pieces of metal about that big, and they were cracked all the way through.
Oh, God.
And this guy was coming up there, was going to hook onto that. And I said, Bill, he can't hook onto that. I'm not going to allow you to lift the airplane with that. And he looked over there, looks at the big cracks, and the guy said, oh, don't worry about it. He says, I can lift 200,000 pounds with this, no problem. He said, you're not going to lift that airplane. So Bill told him to go back and get a crane. Oh, this guy was a little bit upset then. Anyway, he turned around and drove that thing back, and about an hour and a half, 2 hours later, up in the distance, you can see this big cloud of dust coming. And there's a huge machine inside of that dust. And just churning all over. And now he brought in something that's even bigger. I don't know where the Air Force had this thing stored, but it was really a large crane. And he brought it up and parked the wheels right at the edge of the pit. And he's going to lift the airplane. I said, back it up about 20 feet. I don't want to hit the airplane. It'll swing around and knock the wings off, for heaven's sake. Which he did. Then he grumblingly started to get the thing in alignment to drop the lines down, and he hit it dead center where the attachment was. But then I said, Bill, you got to tell this guy he can't lift it until he puts the outriggers out. And Bill went over and talked to him, and he said, you got to put the outriggers out. What? He says, I can lift over 300,000 pounds here. You don't need that. And he said, well, you can't lift the airplane unless you put the outriggers out. It took him about an hour to do that. And he was really one unhappy guy. Anyway, they brought the airplane up, and then they ejected the tanks. And you could see the tanks on the airplane, and then you could see them in the pit. It was that fast, because the distance was only about 6 feet. Anyway, that was the first static test I think that NASA ever did on the aircraft. prior to actually doing it in actual flight. So, and then I worked on basically the analysis and the performance of the systems. That's what I did.
Inspector for the LR11 and the 99 engines for the entire program. I got into rocket propulsion in 1951 when I came to Edwards Air Force Base, and I was in it most of my life until after the 15 program was over. So I watched all the 11s. The first 11 I ever worked on was on the XF91. Anybody can ever remember. High-speed interceptor. Had a rocket engine in it, the K-47 engine, main power plant. And then I went on and worked on the X1s. Even the engines for the X1E would use a special fuel. And when the 99 engine came out, I was fortunate to be able to work with Bill Arnold, which I went to him for a lot of advice, because half the time when I was buying things off, I didn't know what I was doing. So I would go to him and ask him for some advice, and he would help me. And then I had a couple of good mechanics, too, working with me at this table, in fact. Delbert, you remember the time that I paid you to safety wire the banjo on the turbo up for the 99 engine so we could get it delivered on time? That was extra. He was the best safety wire we had, so that's what I paid him for. If they ever found out about that, they'd throw us in jail. I also paid Bob Bernardi to do the same job one time, when he safety them all backwards. I worked with Walt. Walt worked on the PSTS. He and Jim Townsend, I guess, were the number 1 and 2 mechanics there.
He never bought any of my work off, though.
Never paid you for anything. It wasn't very good. No, we had a lot of fun. I enjoyed the program. Like everyone else, every time the X15 comes up, everybody really thinks a long time about it. And there's a million stories you can tell. Some of you don't even want to hear. But I sure want to thank everybody for showing up here, because I sure have enjoyed myself, especially seeing you again, Bill. Especially your sons, now that they're growing up. They look better than you do.
I'll pin you later. Hey, Walt, do me a favor and go down to the end. What do you say? I can get your
I
picture.
will do that. I just do what I'm told.
I can get your picture that way. Otherwise, I got the back of your head.
Oh, we don't want that. There's nothing there. Anyway, I came to work at NACA, and I tell people I started at NACA in 1956, and they said, "No, you mean NASA?" I said, "No, I know what I mean. It was a National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics then." They said, "How old are you?" So, and I don't tell them. And I worked there for a while, and then I transferred up to the rocket base. And then when the X-15 came around, I had a friend, Jack Russell, and he was a very good close friend. And with his influence, I was able to transfer down to the X-15 program. And I also worked on the 11s and the XLR-99s until 1965, and then Bob Field got me an interview. Well, Wade and I both graduated from school. Grammar school, wasn't? Reform school. Reform school. I did one of those. Got our degree. And Bob Field says, "Well, why don't you think about going to work for North America?" And so he got me an interview, and I ended up in personnel. Now it's human resources. And I stayed there for 40 years in HR, which is quite a difference from working out on the test stands. But anyhow, I carried a burden around with me for 50 plus years. Rudy, I owe you an apology.
I'll say.
Rudy was a real buff as far as photography was concerned. Even out there, and he admitted tonight that he took some pictures that he should not have taken. And I had an Olympus camera, which was made in Japan, right?
Yeah.
And I said it was made in Germany. And Rudy, do you remember that?
No, I'm afraid you got me on that one.
Oh, good. And I said, Rudy, this is a German camera. And he says, Walter, you're nuts. It's not. He was a little more polite than that, a little more tactful. But we got into an argument. And finally, Rudy looked at me and he says, if you say an Olympus is a German camera, then it's a German camera. And I knew with every word I was wrong. So, Rudy, I've carried that around with me for 50 years.
You're absolved.
And I just want to apologize to you.
You're absolved.
But also, I want to thank you for putting this together. You've done a terrific job. You and the rest of you.
Hey, thanks. Glad you showed up.
I'm Del John. I was one of the technicians on the LR99. Just building it up, tearing it down, getting it ready, fixing it, and that's about it. I've had a great time. I've been out there since 1953, and I'm still going to the rocket site. At the present time, I'm not doing much up there, but they got me shut down. I was making solid propellants for rocket motors, experimental type stuff. And I can remember Bill Arnold tormenting old Bob Bernardi. Putting heavy stuff in his lunchbox, so when he picked it up, the handle would come off. Okay.
Thank you. I worked for Douglas Aircraft from '55 after I graduated from school to about '61. I ended up here at Edwards with one of their programs, and met Rudy and his wife at church over at Grace Lutheran. And about that time, old T. Garden and Hicks kind of bailed out of here. And Rudy says, hey, I think there's a job opening over here you might be interested in. So I applied to the power plant branch and became an Air Force civilian. And took over the X15 propulsion program. I'm not going to say a whole lot about the engine. It was a great program. I really enjoyed it. It was halfway through the program, they changed the designation from an XLR, which meant experimental, to a YLR, which meant limited production, and it was not limited production. That was a political, I think, issue or whatever. Bill's laughing. The program was an experimental program from the day one, a development program, and we developed things from the day one until probably the last flight, I would guess. Either fixing things or coming up with new things on the engine and making it better. And I think we really all did that. We all had that same goal, and we all really tried to do that. I'm going to show you just a little short 16-millimeter projector. I bought that thing from the American Cancer Society shop for $25 a month ago. If anybody, this is just a short flick. Some of you will remember this thing. We were doing an engine test, trying to get it set up and run correctly, and we tried to do a restart on it, and we had a problem. Here's a laser.
Some of the ladies don't know which end.
Yeah, the fire's supposed to come out this end. Okay. This takes a few seconds. Oh, I didn't still got guys out there. This is our test on engine 101. I don't remember exactly what we were trying to figure out. It has to run for a few seconds. What we did, this was not an engine problem. We were doing a bunch of testing, and we had the propellant tanks pressurized for quite a while. The LOX temperature got too warm on us, from about -297 Fahrenheit for some of you folks. Went up to, I guess, -285 or 280 or something like that. And the engine didn't like it when we restarted it. There are some pictures of this, stills of this, the results of this little problem here around it.
Is this a 99?
This is XLR99, yeah. I'm sorry, I thought I had rerun this with eliminating this little part here.
This is
By
not.
the way, this is old technology too. This is a 16 millimeter motion picture film. This is not video or cell phone cameras or anything like that.
We sort of like that, but that's way high out there.
Is that those you two guys? All right. Okay. Well, don't stay out there while we run this. It didn't work too good. There we go. Okay. They disappeared. Yeah, we didn't want them to get
Blasted them away.
We didn't want them to get hurt up.
Actually, we were running.
they were running as fast as they could the other direction. We probably may have thousands of feet of this kind of film, which nothing.
There's Igniter Island.
Nothing excited happened on. So we there's an engine run of the engine. Mach diamonds coming out the back.
What was the maximum number of Mach
I couldn't
diamonds?
tell you what thrust level that was. This is shutdown, normal shutdown of the engine. And then we wanted to do a restart. Okay, that's a good restart. The engine's right here for some of you who may not. This is the back, ammonia's the back, box is the front.
That was a low thrust run there.
That's a low thrust run. Another shutdown.
At max thrust, what was the number of Mach diamonds you had?
That's 7.
7, I think.
7?
Is
Yeah.
that right, Bill? 7 Mach diamonds at max thrust.
That you can see.
That you can see.
Right.
There
There we
That's
go.
when it works.
There's not supposed to
The
do
liquid
that.
oxygen was too warm.
But things you had to do right, and if you didn't do them right, there were some consequences. And maybe we got there. I don't know. The other thing I wanted to point out was people. And John McTeague kind of stole my thunder yesterday at the GFE. I really enjoyed working with the people. When somebody asked me what I did in my career, I said I worked in the X15. We had a small group of people. We were off on the side. We did our own thing. We knew what we were doing. We did it well. And we didn't have a whole lot of interference from the top. You NASA guys were kind of right there where everybody was, but the Air Force down at the rocket engine shop, we were way down on the flight line. And some of the maintenance got involved with some of the parts, supplies, and all that kind of stuff from the higher ups. But nobody ever asked me what I was doing down there or how I was doing. I didn't have to report to anybody, and I thought that was great. And I think a lot of you were in this kind of that same boat, but it really worked out. There was a good camaraderie between everybody. And the thing I really enjoyed down in the rocket shop was the morality of the guys. You very seldom heard a GD. You very seldom heard a JC spoken, or the F word, which you hear so much nowadays. We didn't do that. I was thinking the other day, I could have taken my wife down there almost any time, or a female secretary, without being embarrassed by people or conversation or what was going on. There might have been a JC or two after that, but but anyway, I have an example. When we made the engine runs, like everything except that last part of it there, we had to make 4 adjustments on the engine. We had to do that in the test stand so that we could get the engine to run properly before we delivered it to NASA. Well, we would make an engine run, and Bill and I would look at the data, the oscillograph stuff you saw maybe in one of the pictures up there, a bunch of wigglies on a roll of paper, like a roll of paper towels. Take some data, do some calculations, and ask the technicians to go out and make a few changes. Tweak this knob a little bit, or move that lever, or take this piece out, put that piece in. Well, sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. Sometimes we'd have to make 2 or 3 different engine runs in order to get it right, because just the nature of the thing. And we went through that for quite a while, but one day we had gone through that quite a few times, and the technicians kind of said,
you brought that.
we're going to take this thing into our hands. And they came up and presented us engineers with the engineer's automatic data analyst. consisted of 4 arrows. You could spin each one in whatever direction you wanted to, and it would tell you how to adjust the slot speed or the what is this?
Jerry?
The whatevers.
Let me see.
the four different adjustments we had to make. And we had a lot of fun with that. And that, you know, that's the kind of relationship that the engineers and the technicians had on this project. I don't know. I wish we had taken kept the record of whether this was better or whether we were better or the technicians were better at their guesswork. But anyway, you know, that I still kept that. I really treasure that thing. I think that was great.
That was great.
It was a fun program, and I think we hope we really all enjoyed it. I did, and I think it was wonderful. Just the last thing, what everybody really dreaded, though, whether it was on the test stand or whether it was in the airplane, was for that little thing to light up. Valve malfunction. Yeah. I don't know where I got that or how I came by it, but that was not a good indication if that thing lit up when the engine was running or trying to run or whatever. But anyway, that's my story. I really love the project, and even on follow on with the XR11s that John.
Anyway, I had the propulsion section, which took care of the engine, the APUs, propellant systems, and all that. When I was working for Convair, I had a lot of experience with the engine on the Atlas missile, so which also had a control box in it too, and a lot of electrical stuff. I was a ham radio operator also, so that got me familiar with the electronics, which is why I could kind of understand both fields. Okay, I was doing that until John moved on to his next thing with the lifting bodies, and then they made me the ops engineer on Ship 3. It was during that time frame that the test stand was trying to get a measurement, I remember, on some kind of a measurement on the engine, and they needed a special transducer that they didn't have. I had friends at the rocket base, so I got a hold of one of them, and we borrowed a transducer. And I think it was an engine run much like the one you saw, because then I got to call him and tell him, you know how it is with rocket engines, you're not going to get your transducer.
Yeah, I'm going to get it back on my feet.
Oh, well. Okay, as ops engineer, and John probably had the same thing happen to him, the night foreman, Raskowski, the phone would ring about 2 in the morning, and it was Raz. And he would talk to you for maybe 5-10 minutes, asking all kinds of questions which weren't related to what he really wanted to know until he was sure you were awake. Then he'd ask you the one that counted. Oh, those were the days. I can remember coming out for a flight in the morning, driving out there in the wee hours in the morning, watching many a sunrise under the wing of the airplane. But on the way out, I'd think, there's got to be a better way to earn a living. As far as lifting the airplane, it's true that we had a heck of a time convincing crane operators how heavy it was, especially if they were from an Air Force base. They were used to lifting aluminum airplanes. And we landed at Cuddyback, and they sent a crane operator over from Fort Irwin. And he asked us how much it weighed, and we told him. He said, "Oh, is that all?" And he puts the outriggers out and goes through the whole routine. He was used to lifting tanks. You want to show that video now?
Can you do that?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay.
You've probably seen them already, but Don Teagard brought a lot of pictures, which are over there in that alcove. Wayne brought a lot of...
Well, I'm Wayne Ottinger. I arrived at Edwards in 1956 as a GE flight test engineer. I was first working for the field service department for a few months, and then I transferred over to Virgil Weaver's group in flight test. And I worked on the 104s, B-58, F-11 1F, and I was visiting Milt Thompson in 56 or 7 when NASA got their first 104s on the J-79. And I worked with Bill Albrecht when he was working with Chance Vaught on the Reg 2. And I wound up at Point Magoo with Chance Vaught on the Reg 2 until we came in one Saturday after I was down there about 6 months. We came in from some sub-trials on a Saturday, and they'd canceled the Regulus 2 and the F8U-3 from Chance Vaught on the same day. And I called an old friend that was ahead of me in school that was running an engineering department over in Mesa, Arizona, and got a job with him on the ejection seat work. It was called actually Talco Engineering, and then Rocket Power joined them, which was out of Grand Central. And the tail end of that year or so that I worked out there, I was working on solid propellant sounding rockets. But then Jim Love hired me in April of '60. I arrived at FRC, and I've got my memoirs. I think there's plenty of these. There's a 3 DVD set. I got out of control. I scanned a lot of my paperwork, and I pulled a lot of frames off of some films, and I wound up with 190 pages that I bound in a 1-inch binder and gave it to Bill Dana, who had just moved into Phoenix area. He's in a rehab center over there in Sun City and in pretty bad shape. I saw him a week ago last Tuesday, but I gave him this book of pictures so he can look through it. He's got Parkinson's, and I think he's got a stroke problem. As Judy said, he had blood pressure events, and to me that means stroke. But I hope I can get to see him again in the next few weeks. But I went overboard, made these. Also, after I left the X15 program, I was a project engineer at FRC for the Lunar Landing Research Vehicle, and went on to Bell in '66 as technical director on the trainer that we used to train the Apollo astronauts for the lunar landings. And I got involved with Neil a couple of years ago, helping him get a speech ready for SETP, and as a result of that, I proposed a conference that we wound up holding in Tempe, Arizona in March of '08. And that triggered where we had a lot of people come and talked about the training that we had done. Well, that got Johnson Space Center interested in a trait study to do training for the new Altair lander that they've been preliminary design and for the Constellation program. So I worked the last year and a half as a NASA SAGES consultant, which stands for Shuttle and Apollo Generation Expert Services. So I got paid out of SAIC on a contract for SAGES. And then I worked for Orbital Sciences as a consultant doing preliminary design on a new lunar lander, trainer that is, and a research vehicle. They need both. A lot of the Johnson people don't believe that. The younger people, they want to get in a T-38 or a helicopter and go out and train on how to do a lunar landing. They just don't understand the physics of it.
Well, don't forget to tell us about the Murphy machine, though. That's going to be key.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, this conference we held last December is this Apollo 40-year set, and that's the day that we spent last December where we had 4 of the moonwalkers and myself teaching the young'uns, I call them, we did it down at Houston, and we were sharing with them how we did the training in the 60s. So I brought those, and this one is the the first DVD on this is just 50 minutes of me talking over 190 slides, and the next 2 DVDs are about 3 hours of movies that I went through and edited out of about 8 hours of X15 movies. and put the clips together, including the 30th anniversary in 1989 and the astronaut wings ceremony in 2005. I hadn't taken time to look at all this stuff until a few weeks ago, and I had an awful lot of fun looking at that. And in 1989, they had all 8 pilots there, and Neil couldn't come, but the other 3 pilots had been deceased for that one. And now there's only 4 living pilots, and Neil won't come to a fundraiser like we had last night for the museum because he can't discern or turn down, I guess, requests that he'd get embattled with for fundraisers. So Joe was the only one that, because Bob White had been hospitalized. I understand he's in the hospital now. And but on the Murphy machine, and I talk about that on my first disc about having pulled a few boners. I don't know what they are. I've pulled so many since then, but I think Billy Arnold tagged me with, and Bob Bradford tagged me with the name Murphy, so it became known as Murphy's Machine. And but Al Covington and I got assigned by Bickle to go out and try to find out how we could do a better coating on a field repair. And so we did go down and visit a number of labs, and some of you all went with us. I remember Covington was a member of the Aero Club, which was hangared down at South Base. So he says, well, let's go down to San Diego, and I'll fly you down, and we won't go commercial. So I was dumb enough to get in the Navion with him, and he had a generator failure going down. We had some bad weather, and I can remember we were flying around, skirting around Palm Springs and that San Jacinto mountain range, but we ran into this bad weather, and we got lost down in there. He had because he lost the generator going in. We wound up coming down over San Marcos out in North San Diego County. There's a little airport out there. Well, he didn't know if his gear was going to come down or not. He didn't have any instruments. So he kept making these practice approaches. Well, by the time he had about 6 approaches in there, trying to get enough guts to land, we had the whole crowd out there at the airport lined up to watch us crash. And we got down all right, but there was no battery charger. And I was really stupid because I got back in the airplane about 4 hours later after we got the battery charged, which was across the runway from an old guy that was making records in his house, and he was a ham radio operator. So he had stuff going on from all over the world in that, and he had his record-making machine and stuff. So we had an extra 4 or 5 hours but then I got back in and we flew back on just a battery. But we went on, and I got the idea with that little plasma arc gun to go through that 8.5-inch diameter throat, I think. And I can remember going up, I wanted to build a pantograph machine, and we got pictures of it in this stuff. And I made a little comb mine 25-page handout for hard copy too. But that's 25 pages out of 190 that's on the disc of just the stills. So, but I can remember getting the jet engine rollover stand to put the 99 in it and wrap it with plastic. And I went to get the sign-off. Some officer that had to release the rollover stand to us was umpiring a Little League game up in the base housing. So I went up in the afternoon and interrupted the game because he was out behind the pitcher and got him to sign off the paper so we could get that rollover stand. And so we went ahead, and there were about, counting myself, there were 10 of us at FRC in the 2 shops, Sparky's and Rebels. And we worked 12-hour shifts 7 days a week, getting that machine built for a couple of months. And we went down to Sepulveda Boulevard and did the first engine and turned it over to Jerry. And Rudy inherited all of the need to fine-tune the damn thing and to get it to work. But that was a real interesting experience. And there's some other stuff that I talk about. So I'll stop, and I don't think I'll show any of this because it's all there.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
You tell me.
You know, if it can be made to happen, it will happen.
There you go.
Yeah.
Good, bad, or indifferent.
Okay.
Would you throw this back in, and I'll use this as sort of a basis for
Sure.
talking on this?
Sure.
58, and I think you've got my bios already. If you haven't read it, I'll do it briefly. I was enlisted, had been in school, had recently gotten married, short on funds, decided, well, I'll bail out of school for a while, join the Air Force, and the guys that have been working with in engineering research at NC State University as a part-time job, a lot of those guys had been Air Force vets, and they said, well, you can go into service and get your military requirements out of the way and then get GI Bill. So I said, well, that sounds good. So that might resolve my financial problem right now and also give me a break from school for a while and earn some money and then come back to school on GI Bill. So I joined up in September of 1958. Well, what nobody told me was that the GI Bill went out in July 31, 1958. So I signed up thinking I was getting the GI Bill. So when I left in 1962, they gave me a handshake and a wave, and that's all I got. So we paid our way back going through school. That's the story there with that one. But in the meantime, though, I went through basic training and did all the AFSC stuff, the testing and everything. And they sent, I was really hoping to go to Tullahoma, Tennessee, because I'd been in aeronautical engineering and had 3 years in aeros. And I thought maybe I can get to Tullahoma, Tennessee, not too far from North Carolina. And they had a high-speed wind tunnel there, plus other test facilities. And so where did they send me? West Coast. Not the East Coast where I'm from, West Coast. So I wind up here at Edwards by Christmas time. And so they assigned me to the power plant branch. And they came out after interviewing, find out what my capabilities were. And they told me I was going to power plant branch, and I says, what in the world are you sending me to an electrical power plant branch? You know, I thought it was a substation. And but the guy explained to me, no, the power plant branch was really where they dealt with all the overhaul, maintenance, and so forth of the engines for all the experimental aircraft. And they also gave me the good news that they were going to put me in the X15 program, which is really what I wanted to do. And so with that being the case, I did my FSC, and Bob Nagel, and the reason I lay so much emphasis about Bob, is Bob reached down and pulled me up and said, hey, I need your help, because I had the engineering experience, you know, not engineering experience, but engineering training, at least 3 years of school. He says, you could do my data reduction work for me. So all this data reduction work that was done on the engines for the first 4 years, yours truly was doing all that reading out. But it was enjoyable and it was a good experience. So can we flip through these things at a fair speed?
Yeah.
I'm not going to start anywhere in particular, but I'll cover some of these issues later.
Do you want the lights left on? Or do you want...
I think everybody can see that okay. That's the blockhouse, of course, where everybody's crowded into, the ones that were responsible for the test runs. That's where they went into for the actual test run. And so go ahead and bring it forward, and if it'll go forward. It was working great a while ago. That the thrust chamber, which had been coated with what was called a Rokite coating at the time, and it was a ceramic, flame sprayed ceramic coating, which was put on the tubes of the chamber to prevent burnout, to help prevent burnout of the tubes. And they were having a problem with adhering of this material adhering to the tubes, and so it would flake off, and then they would have erosion of the tube. And ultimately some nitrating of the tube as well, wind up with cracks, and then you have leaks, and then the thing would split, and then you got the possibility of an engine explosion. So you don't leaky tubes around. So the big question was, how can we, improve this coating? So that's when Wayne and actually I guess it was Wright-Patterson Air Force Base started addressing the issue, and they were looking at the possibility of using plasma spray. And so they picked up on plasma spray operations, and then that, after they essentially decided what the coating system would be, Wayne picked up on the approach to actually applying the material to the surface of the chamber using the plasma spray process and this modified rig for getting that plasma gun inside the chamber. And so that's what he was talking about when he was spending a lot of engineering time and a lot of construction time to get this thing up and operational so that we could coat the chamber without having to take it apart. Otherwise, the previous process required physically disassembling the engine, taking the head off, and then going through and coating the chamber all alone, just a standalone chamber. And so that was too expensive to do. So by developing the technique that Wayne did, you were able to get in there and coat the chamber with the gun and apply a modified coating on the chamber, which they had determined at Wright-Patterson should be satisfactory. And so that was where it stood when it sort of came over to us and went to the maintenance group. Actually, it was a group of welding. It was in the welding shop is where it was initially assigned. But Murphy's machine was brought in over there, and then there was a period of training and so forth that the guys learned how to use the plasma spray equipment, how to set up the chambers, how to apply the coating to the chambers. And that's where I got assigned by T-Garden to go over and work with the chambers on the Jim Larissy was the guy's name. And so working with Jim and with his coating machine, we determined that we probably could improve it a little bit if we improved the controls on the equipment so that we gave a more uniform deposition of coating on the chamber. So that's basically what I wound up doing, was basically just looking at the chamber equations, developing speed, relative velocity equations for positioning the gun down the center line of the chamber, and doing it in such a way that you deposit the more uniform coating of plasma deposited material. And so that was what I was working on the last year. And this is some of the data I actually plotted when Betty Love was talking about reducing data. This is the data, some of the data, actual data from the engine, in which we're plotting the chamber pressure with engine thrust, so that you get the relationship between chamber pressure and thrust. And we'll move on a little bit further there, and further down, and we'll see some shots that show some of the oscillograph data that was used. Well, that's the old engine, XLR11s.
I haven't found the right combination of menus yet. I don't understand this iPhoto program.
Okay. Well, we may just skip it. But anyway, I had 4 great years there, and working with T-Garden and Nagel and Roger, and then finally Jerry. And Jerry was the last guy on board about the time I left, because I think, Roger, I believe you left before I did too, didn't you? Or did you leave after I did?
I think I left after you did.
Okay.
I recall your episode on negotiating with personnel.
Yeah, try to get off base. Yeah. And so anyway, I was working with Jerry and Roger then at the very end, and it turned out to be a great experience. And went back to school, and as a result of having an experience here, I switched my curriculum and got out of aeronautical engineering and went into material science, and that's where I stayed. Best move I ever made. I enjoyed my career. But it was great working with those guys. It was a great period of time to be out here and working with the X15 program, and particularly rocket engines. And unfortunately, the rocket engine...
Hey, I got it. Fine.
Good. The rocket, that's the thrust chamber expansion on the outside. You can see the injectors on the inside there. That's where the fuel was mixed. But it was a great time to be here, but the engines don't get much recognition except where there was a problem. That's the plasma spray process there. And the boom that sets the, that's just the thrust stand again. These are just arbitrary shots I pulled together to use as background, night shot. But it was a great program, as everybody has said. Everybody treated me quite well when I was there, and I learned a lot. People were patient with me, and I think that the engine, the guys in the engine program made a tremendous contribution. Yeah, that was me. Publicity shot for a local home paper. But there you can see the chipping out or the delamination of the coating. Those little dark spots right there, that's coating delamination, and that's the problem that we were running into in the chamber. And this is the coating thickness cross-section of the coating as deposited. The tube section was down below and the gradations up above. And there's some data showing the comparison between flame spray. And that's Murphy's machine right there. That's what Wayne designed.
Hey, Billy, you said earlier, I think I heard you say something about a mild coating problem.
But you talk about Wade called himself inspector, actually he's quality.
Build the engine, was it a year?
Yeah, well, we shipped the engine,
Yeah.
thrust chamber back to.
You'd take about a year by the time you ship it back and forth.
It would
do
be
all
a
that work.
year recycled, just about a year.
Yeah, and once Rudy got that machine developed right, Jerry could turn it around in a week or two in the field, without having to tear anything down. And plus, I think you had a coating that lasted maybe twice as long as the original.
Lasted longer, yeah.
Okay. I will not argue that point. That you guys did an excellent job. There's no getting away from it. And even my couple of my years back east said you did.
Kept the what?
Well, it was, sitting in that Navy on up there in bad weather made me think a lot.
This is a shot of Bob Nagel, and this is the base of my X15. These are just random shots that I put together sort of the background for the dinner tonight.